once we have it recorded. So hello and welcome. This is actually the first webinar that we presented back in April on Birding 101. So I've tweaked it a little bit. We've learned a lot from our past webinars that we've been doing. So today's webinar is on Birding 101. My name is Tyler, and I'm going to be your presenter today. We'll be focusing on beginner birding and setting the foundations for bird identification. So whether you are a brand new birder and you're brand new and you're just learning how to identify birds and you're just looking for tips and tricks to help you learn, or if you're an experienced birder, maybe you've been to all of our webinars and you're out there birding every day. I hope you can take away something from this webinar, if not ways to help teach others about birding. If you have any questions that come up during this webinar, feel free to use the chat window. We'll get to your questions maybe in real time. If not, we'll definitely get to all of your questions at the end. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So please interact using that chat function. We have a monitor on there. Kelsey is monitoring that. So if you see someone that is called Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, that's Kelsey. She'll be answering a lot of your questions. And like I said earlier, we are recording this webinar. So you don't need to worry about scrambling to take notes. It'll be up on our YouTube channel probably by the end of today, and I'll be sending out an email to that link by tomorrow. So I wanted to teach you all about bird identification because I personally, I love birds. I find comfort in watching birds. And during this time, we have a little more free time on our hands, some of us, and we are spending more time outside. We're also spending more time looking out our windows and spending more time at home. So I thought it'd be helpful to share some of the tips and tricks that we have at Bird Conservancy. Awesome. Here we go. So if this is your first time Zooming, Zoom is a platform we're using. I'm sure many of you are experts on this by now. I know I've learned a lot on Zoom in the last couple months. But if it is your first time, it does take a little playing around with. So I just want to point out that your video and your microphone should be off and muted. It's going to help our technology run a lot smoother. So make sure your video has that line through it and that you're muted as well. So these can both be done if you look at the bottom. You just click those and make sure they have that red line. We're also going to be using the chat window to communicate with each other. So when I went full screen, your screen probably went full as well. If you want to exit that full screen, you can either click escape or exit full screen. And then if you click on that chat window button, it looks like a little chat box, that'll actually dock your chat window on the side of your Zoom screen. And make sure you're addressing your comments to everyone. So that way we are all interacting and we can all learn from each other. So if you have any questions about Zoom or docking your chat window, you can just ask Kelsey and she'll help you with the technology a little bit. So we're going to start off our program the same way we always start all of our programs, and that's by getting to know you all a little bit better. So in the chat window, if you can type where you're from, where you're zooming from today, your favorite bird, I know my favorite bird changes every hour, so your favorite bird today, and then how many people you are watching this webinar with. I know a lot of you are just using one screen, which is great, but we want to know exactly how many people we are reaching and how many future birders we will have out there. So again, type where you're from, how many people are watching with you, and what your favorite bird is today. Awesome. I see some kids are tuning in with us, so I'm glad we're reaching the youth. That's what our goal is. I see some great birds out there. Osprey, the American white pelican. I love those. Some bluebirds. Yeah, up in Evergreen, I'm sure you're seeing some bluebirds and maybe some mountain bluebirds. Raven. That's a good choice. Ravens are extremely intelligent. Thank you all for filling in the chat window. I love to see where people are zooming from, especially now that we're doing these virtual programs. We're reaching people outside of Colorado. and that's really exciting for us. So you can keep filling that in, keep typing in where you're zooming from, how many are watching with you, and your favorite bird today. We're going to get started. So a little bit about your presenters today. Like I said, my name is Tyler Cash. I'm an environmental educator with the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. And joining me in the chat window is Kelsey Mazer. She is our program and volunteer coordinator. We're both really happy to be here and to be presenting this webinar with you. My favorite bird today is what used to be called the Western Scrub Jay. It's now the Woodhouse's Scrub Jay out here in Colorado. I just love corvids. They're really intelligent birds, and they're really funny to watch, their behavior. And Kelsey's favorite bird today is the northern cardinal. I'm guessing she picked the northern cardinal because I know she was out in Ohio the last couple of weeks, and I'm sure she saw a lot of cardinals. I love those too. I didn't grow up seeing them, so to see a cardinal is really, really fun. All right, so if this is your first program with the Bird Conservancy, welcome. We're glad to have you here. So I just want to tell you a little bit about our organization. So at the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, our mission is to conserve birds and their habitats. We do this through an integrated approach of science, education, and land stewardship. So our science team, they're out working from the border of Canada all the way down into Mexico, and they're learning a lot about bird movement and bird migration, and kind of collecting all of that data. And that data helps us as the education team to inform the public about all the cool science we're doing and all the cool things about birds. Our stewardship program, they're spread out all throughout the Rocky Mountain region, and they're working with private landowners to ensure that their land is as bird friendly as possible, and their habitat is not only helping them as ranchers, but also helping the wildlife that surround their ranches. So like I said, our work radiates across the breeding, wintering, and migratory ranges of birds. So we have people working from the base into Canada all the way down into Mexico, from the Rockies to the Great Plains. And now with these virtual webinars, we're actually reaching people outside of Colorado and across the country, and even in other countries, which is pretty exciting. All right, so in this webinar, we're going to learn what characteristics are specific to birds, what makes them different than squirrels or bobcats. We're going to learn also why birds are important, why we have this whole nonprofit organization dedicated to helping conserve birds. And then we're going to learn about the steps that we use to identify birds. Hopefully, it'll help break down the birds that you see and help you identify them a little bit easier. And then at the very end, we're going to have what I like to call learning celebrations. We're going to apply all of the steps that we learned during this webinar, and we're going to identify some birds on the pictures that I'll be showing. So I just want to tell a quick little story about how I personally got into birding. I was lucky enough to grow up in Southern California, and I was outside all the time. My parents were very lucky, and they took us camping a lot and to the beach. So I just spent my whole youth outside playing in dirt and being curious about the natural world. When I was in college, that's when I really started to identify birds and get into bird behavior and birding in general. And I remember one specific time I was in one of my environmental interpretation classes, and that was a class I was outside in the redwood forest, and we were looking up at two birds. Both of these birds were blue, but they were different, and that caught my curiosity. One bird I identified as a Steller's jay, and the other one was actually a scrub jay. So if you have looked at both of those, they're pretty similar. They're in the same family. But at that time, I just had no idea what they were. I never identified birds. I always just watched them. And it sparked this curiosity within me to keep finding out and keep identifying birds. And I haven't stopped since. I've been a birder ever since, and my life list has grown exponentially since I identified those first Steller jay and scrub jays back in college. So first off, I want you to type into the chat window, what makes a bird a bird? What characteristics or adaptations are specific to birds that make them a bird? So type into the chat window, what makes a bird a bird? Yeah, color. Yeah, Chris, they have feathers. They lay eggs. Feathers are extremely unique to birds. No other animals have feathers. Yeah, birds have wings. Thank you all for filling out the chat window. It's great to see that. Yeah, the ability to fly. Ooh, their beaks. Yeah, their beaks are an amazing adaptation. We'll be talking a little bit about beaks later on. I think if I could have any adaptation from a bird, I'd probably take the ability to fly. Flying is pretty cool. Awesome. So thank you all for interacting in the chat window. So birds, like you all said, they all have feathers. Feathers are unique to birds. There's no other animal species that have feathers. Birds are also warm-blooded, or as we scientists call endothermic. They're like us. They create their own warmth through their blood. They're not like reptiles that need to get their warmth from the sun. So they're warm-blooded or endothermic. They also have hollow bones, which allow them to fly. Even if we had all of these adaptations that birds have, we had feathers, we had wings, we still would not be able to fly because our bones are not hollow. We are heavy and we would not be able to lift off the ground. Birds also have talons, or those claws, and they use those talons to catch their prey. They also use their claws to perch on trees. Some of them use them to swim or to walk on the ground. Birds have wings. It's the greatest adaptation of all. It's so amazing just to watch birds fly around. Birds also have tails. Their tails help them with balance and stabilizing while in flight. And like we saw in the beginning of the chat window, birds lay eggs. And there's many more adaptations like eyesight and things like that. So that's what makes birds unique and different from all other animals. So I get this question a lot. So why birds? Why are we here learning about birds? You all might know this because you signed up for a birding webinar, but birds are extremely inspirational. They've inspired us for ages. There's artwork about birds. It's inspired engineering like airplanes. So first off, I think birds are extremely inspirational. They're so cool to watch. Birds are also accessible. You can bird anywhere. They're on all 7 continents. They are in the cities. They're out in the forests or in the woods. So you can see a bird anywhere you go. It doesn't matter where you live. As long as you spend time outside, I can guarantee you'll see a bird at some point. Birds also serve as ecosystem services. So they provide us services such as pest control and seed dispersal. I know when I'm out camping and there's a lot of mosquitoes around, I'm always really happy to see swallows flying around eating those mosquitoes, so then I don't get as bit up. So if you don't like mosquitoes, you should definitely like birds because they help eat all of those pests. And then birds are also environmental indicators. They're the first group that's going to be affected by any environmental change. I'm sure many of you have heard of the canary in the coal mine. They tell us a lot about what we are doing wrong with our environment, or if there's something that's just off with our environment. So they're extremely cool creatures. So how many birds do we have out there in the world? We have a lot. So in the world, there's around 10,000 species of birds that have been identified. In North America alone, we have around 1,000 species. And if we narrow that down even into just Colorado, there have been 507 species identified here in Colorado, which is just a little more than half that we have in North America. If you're in Colorado, we're lucky enough to kind of be on the border of 2 migratory flyways. So we're able to see a lot more birds than we would normally see maybe if we're in the west or only in the east. And then at Bar Lake State Park, that is where our headquarters are located. It's what is considered a birding hotspot. A lot of birds congregate there, especially during the migratory season. And there have been around 350 species seen at Bar Lake since we've started recording that. So birding really is a lifelong hobby. You might consider yourself an expert, and then you can go to a different state or a different country, and you have to start all over again and use all those tools that you have learned. I like to say if you feel like you're bored with birding, take a little road trip and go to the other side of the country during migration, and it'll spark that interest real quick. All right, so now we're gonna dive in a little bit into our fundamentals of how we actually identify birds. I'm just gonna check the chat window if there's any questions. I see a question, where is Bar Lake? So Bar Lake is located northeast of Denver. I live in Westminster, and it's about a 25, 30-minute drive to get to Bar Lake. It's an amazing, amazing place to go birding. It's just an amazing state park. In general, they have a beautiful nature center and great paths to walk around. You can also go birding via canoe or kayak there. You can paddle around. So if you've not been to Bar Lake and you're interested in birds, I highly suggest, and you live in Colorado, I highly suggest checking it out because it is a great, great place to go birding and hang out. All right, so to learn a little bit more about the fundamentals. So the first step in identifying a bird is locating that bird. You cannot identify a bird if you don't see one. So trying to find that bird, it can actually be pretty hard. A lot of the times we only hear the birds, and it's kind of hard to see, especially if you live up in the forest. They're really hard to spot. So locate that bird, and the first thing that is important to do is trying to figure out the size of that bird. And I find it helpful to compare it to a bird that you already know. So a lot of us know the size of a crow or the size of a robin or a hawk. So whenever I see a bird, I like to compare it to a bird that I already know. So is that bird smaller than a robin? Is it bigger than a crow? And then you want to look at the most noticeable thing about that bird. I like to call these field marks. So the most noticeable thing, it could be that it has a red belly. That's the first thing that stands out to you. It can even be the shape of the bird. The shape might be the most noticeable thing. It might have really tapered wings or really broad wings. So that's kind of the first thing that you notice is really important because that's going to tell you a lot about the bird that you're seeing. And then I like to work my way down the bird. So once you've located the bird, you've determined its size and the most noticeable thing about that bird, you then want to work from the head down to the tail. So observe the bird's shape and look at the head. There's a lot of, as you can see in this diagram, there's a lot of really cool scientific words for all of these features of a bird's head. But it's really important to look at the shape of the beak or the bill. That's going to tell you what that bird eats, and it's going to tell you a little bit more about the habitat that they're in. It'll also help you narrow down their family. Finches have a different shaped beak than a falcon, or a warbler. They have the small skinny beaks. They're going to eat more insects. So that's going to help you narrow down into a family. Some birds have really cool crests. We don't see that on this bird, but a crest like a mohawk, like the Steller's jay. Those are really important features to look at. Also an eye ring. Some birds have an eye ring, like a white circle around their eye, and they can be in all different shapes. So looking at the head is really important. And then you want to work your way down. So I like to go from the head and then looking at the wings. So the wings can tell us a lot about the shape of the bird, but they also have colors that might stand out to us a lot. So we call stripes on the wings, we call these wing bars. And you can determine a lot about a species based on if they have wing bars, if they don't have wing bars, what color their wing bars are. They can also have what is called a wing patch. So that's going to be a patch of color on their wings. And sometimes you can see these when they're in flight. You can see the sun going through their wings and you can determine that wing patch. And then their tail. Birds have a whole bunch of different shapes of tails. They can be long tails or short. They can be a rounded tail or forked. They can be lighter or darker than the rest of the body. So as we can see with this bird flying in this picture, we call this a swallowtail. And that's a great identifying mark for that bird. If anyone knows when I show up these pictures, if you know what that bird is, feel free to type it into the chat window. We like to see people identifying birds, even if they're just pictures. All right. Oh. And then after you've gotten a good look at the bird, and hopefully the bird is still around, it hasn't flown off yet, you want to look at the bird's behavior. So a bird's behavior is going to tell you a lot about that bird. Is the bird on the ground eating seeds? Is it up in a tree? Is it soaring? What is that bird doing? It's really important to watch their behavior. And I get a lot of comfort and a lot of fun just watching the bird's behavior without even identifying it. Birds are really interesting creatures, and it's cool to figure out what they're doing and why they're doing that. And that'll lead you into the habitat. So habitat is really important when you're identifying a bird because birds specify their food source based on the habitat that they're in. So you're going to see a different bird if you're up in the alpine, really high up in elevation, versus a bird down in the plains. They're going to be a little bit different based on the time of the year. If you're near a lake, you're going to see different birds that are in the water. And that's going to help you narrow down your identification. Like I said, there's a whole bunch of birds out there in the world and even in the country. So trying to narrow down as much as you can is really, really important. So after you've gotten a really good look at that bird, hopefully, or if the bird just flies away really quickly, it's time to crack open a field guide. So we like these laid out steps, 1 through 7. Does this always happen? No. Sometimes you have to jump around with these steps. Sometimes you just get that one noticeable feature, and that helps you identify a bird just based on that feature. So in a perfect world, the birds stick around and we get to watch them. But the reality is birds are moving around a lot, and they can be really hard to identify. All right, and I want to bring up quickly about the field guide. So a field guide is, I like to think of them as a dictionary of birds. A field guide is what you're going to be using to identify birds. It's basically that it's going to have all of the species that you need. So there's many different kinds of field guides, which can be a little bit overwhelming if you're just starting. But I'll let you know right now, the first field guide that you get, that's going to be the one that you are going to love. And it's going to be the one that you are going to use. So some examples, there's the Sibley field guide. That's my favorite field guide. I use the Sibley Birds West version since Colorado is kind of located a little more on the west. There's also the Kaufman field guide. That's a great one. If you're just learning, it's color coded a little bit, so that helps you out. There's also the Nat Geo field guide, the Audubon field guide. There's a lot of them. I personally find with teaching, I like to teach with the Sibley or the Kaufman. Those are kind of the most straightforward field guides we have out there. And luckily for us, if you have an iPhone or a smartphone, the Merlin Bird app that the Cornell Lab of Ornithology put out, that is a great resource to have. Most of us always have our phones on us at all times. We're not always lugging around a field guide. So the Merlin Bird ID app, that is a free app that you can download. And it's actually really cool if you're just starting because it'll actually walk you through the steps that we just went through in this webinar, and it'll help you narrow down a bird that you see on your phone. I also use the Merlin Bird app a lot for learning bird calls and bird songs. So they have all of the songs and calls of birds on that app. So when I'm out hiking and I hear a bird, I like to play the song in my ear to try to identify a bird based on their song. And the last thing that's really important with field guides is to look at the range map. So here's an example of a range map. This is a range map for an American goldfinch. And this is really important to use when you're learning. It'll help you with the power of deduction. When we're teaching our summer camp kids, whether it's virtually this year or on the normal year, we'd be teaching our kids with field guides out birding. They always tell us, oh, it's this bird or it's that bird. And I always like to say, well, based on the color you see of the range map for that bird, would we be able to see that bird in Colorado right now? So range maps, there's a lot of different colors based on the field guide that you use. But I just want to talk a little bit about these colors. So the color is going to tell you where that bird is at a certain time of year. So with this American goldfinch, with the blue, that's where we can see American goldfinches when they're not breeding. So this will be their winter range. Their non-breeding range is the blue. The purple means that bird can be seen there year round. So if you are in this purple area, you probably see American goldfinches year round. And then birds, they also have a breeding range. So this kind of salmon orange color up here is the breeding range of an American goldfinch. That's where you can see them in summer. So whenever you find a bird, you are trying to identify it using a field guide or your Merlin Bird app. It's really, really important to look at the range map because it'll eliminate a lot of species for you and help you narrow it down. All right, I'm just gonna take a quick look at the chat window and see if there have been any questions. I see some of you have the Merlin Bird ID app. Yeah, Sibley, so that's David Allen Sibley. He's my favorite field guide. He's an amazing ornithologist and an amazing artist as well. Yeah, birds have ears. They're not like ours. We have these big floppy ears. Birds' ears are just like a little hole, and we can't see them because they're covered with feathers. So again, if you have any questions, just keep typing those into the chat window. Kelsey's doing a great job at answering those. Also, I wish you guys could see my field guide because I personally love just reading the field guide all the time. That's how I learned. I just brought my field guide everywhere and I would read it and look through it, and I learned a lot about that. Now it looks like it's falling apart. I might need to get a new field guide soon. All right, so a field guide is really important, but I like to call binoculars a birding essential. You can bird without binoculars. I bird without binoculars all the time, especially when I'm driving. It is dangerous, but you get pretty good at birding while driving, especially if you're commuting or on a road trip. But if you're going out birding and you're learning, it's a really good idea to have binoculars with you. Binoculars are important when it comes to birding because if we walk right up to a bird, the bird will just fly away without us seeing it. So binoculars help us stay a little more secretive. So a couple of tips with using binoculars. It's really important to learn the different parts of your binoculars. So we can see the eyepieces. That's the piece that we're gonna put up to our eyes. That's what we're gonna look through. And then the focus knob, they're usually located either in the front or on the top of the binoculars. That's gonna help bring the image that you are looking at into focus. There's also this fancy diopter on the right eyepiece. That's gonna help personalize your binoculars to your own eyes. We get a lot of questions. If I wear glasses, can I still use binoculars? Yes, you can. If you need your glasses to see, your binoculars aren't gonna help you see any better. Most binoculars, these eyepieces, they twist up or they twist down. So if you are someone that wears eyeglasses, you just keep your eyepieces down, and that's gonna help you be able to use them even if you are wearing glasses. One of the first things we hear about when we're teaching people how to use binoculars is that they're seeing a lot of black. With probably every class I've ever taught, with no matter what age group, I always hear, I think these binoculars are broken. I just see black. Most of the time, the binoculars, fortunately, are not broken. That's where this center hinge will come into play. So if you have a pair of binoculars, they pull out and you can pull them wide or you can pull them in skinny. And that's because all of us, our eyes are in different positions. So not all of us have, close eyes or far apart eyes. So you have to adjust them based on where your eyes are on your head. We get a lot of questions also about binocular recommendations. I have Eagle Optics, which are owned by Vortex, which is what this picture is. They're a great brand to start out with. Binoculars range anywhere from $50 to $3,000. So it matters how much you want to invest. I personally like the Vortex because they have a lifetime warranty, no questions asked. I dropped my binoculars last summer during my summer camp and they broke. I sent them right into Vortex and they fixed them up and sent them back with no charge. So that's a great thing to look into as well. Nikon, they make great binoculars. Bushnell, Audubon. The Audubon website actually has a great resource if you're looking at buying binoculars. They have them rated for each level and what you're looking for, and they rated the best binoculars that that they think for those different price ranges. So if you're just learning how to use binoculars, it might be hard right away trying to find birds with binoculars. So some tips is when you're just learning, it's good to find an object that's not moving. Birds are usually flying around. They can be kind of hard to find with binoculars. So find an object that's not moving, play around with that center hinge, make sure you see one image and no black, and mess around with your focus knob. And then when you do hear a bird or you see a bird up in a tree, it's really important to find that bird with your eyes first. So keep your eyes on that bird and then bring your binoculars up to your eyes, and that should put that bird right into your binoculars. I know it's really, really hard to try to find a bird with binoculars just by looking around in a tree. So I highly suggest finding that bird with your eyes first and then bringing your binoculars up to your eyes. Binos are great. I bring mine everywhere. It is a birding essential if you're really wanting to look at those close-up field marks and watch birds. Another important thing with Birding 101, or if you're just starting out, is to keep a field journal. Field journals are really important to help you remember your notes. It also help you keep a life list. So it's really important to write down the birds that you see. Us as birders, we like to brag about how many birds we've seen because there's so many to see in the world. So when you identify a bird, I suggest that you write that bird down in a notebook or on an app. It's really cool to look back and see where you identified birds and how many birds you've identified. It's also, I like to write it down, my thoughts and experiences when I'm going birding. It helps you bring you back to a time when you're curious and excited, and it helps you understand a little bit more about the habitat that you're birding in as well. So there's a bunch of different ways to journal, especially with a field journal. I suggest finding what works for you. It's really cool to look back. I have a whole bunch of journals, and I look back on them every now and again, and it brings me back to that experience, which is really fun. Okay, so we're kind of getting into our learning celebration time. So some of you, you might have been identifying some of the pictures that we see. So now is a good time. If you have a field guide, I suggest that you grab that field guide before we get started. The next couple slides are of pictures that are pretty common, and they're pictures for us to identify, and we're going to be entering those in the chat window. So first off, when we're doing these birding quizzes, one thing I want to let you know is it's 100% okay to be wrong, and it's 100% okay to guess. Not all of us are ornithologists. Hopefully a lot of us are just learning, and that's why you're attending this Birding 101 webinar. But I encourage you to at least try to get it down to a family and help you narrow it down. A family could be a hawk or a falcon or a blackbird or an oriole. So before you even get down to the species, it's important to try to figure out that family first. If you know that bird right away, it's really hard to not shout out or type in right away, because I know we get really excited when we know things. But give others a chance to look it up in their field guide because they might be learning as well. When you type in your answer, if you know it right away, tell us why you think that. So if I was looking at a bird, I would tell you why I identify that bird based maybe on its colors or its shape or the habitat that it's in. If you don't want the bird to be spoiled for you, you really want to spend time identifying that bird, just don't look at the chat window. So everyone, you can get out your field guide, or if you have the Merlin Bird ID app, you can use that as well, or even just go with your instinct. So give everyone around a minute to type in their answers for the birds, and we'll have a lot of fun. Again, this is a learning celebration, so we're celebrating everything we've learned in this webinar so far. So here's our first bird, and I've also put the steps to identifying on the side. So try to go through those steps, and eventually they'll become ingrained in your head. Thank you all for typing into the chat window too. Glad you guys are having some good conversations. So this bird can be seen all throughout North America. A lot of us either know it by its call, which I think sounds really robotic. This bird is also called based on what it looks like. Not all birds are named based on their colors, but this one is. So I see a lot of us have typed in, this indeed is a red-winged blackbird. So what are some clues that give this bird away, this red-winged blackbird? Yeah, the color. So this one is amply named for what it looks like. It has an all black body. It has that red spot on its wing, a red-winged blackbird. Yes, it is smaller than a crow. Good job. It's really important to go through these steps. This is really going to help get it ingrained in your brain. And especially with these virtual things, you don't get to see the size of the bird. So that can be really tough learning to identify based on pictures because we don't have any scale. But it is definitely smaller than a crow. I guess, yeah, it does require, Merlin requires location. But you can actually, if you just push explore birds, and if you already have a bird pack, all the birds we're going to be looking at, they're either in Colorado. Most of them are common throughout North America. So wherever you may be, that's okay. So I usually use the explore bird option when I'm using my Merlin bird app. Yeah, see, what does this eat? So based on the beak that we notice on this red-winged blackbird, what do we think this bird would eat? Yeah, insects. We can see this beak's kind of sharp, but it's also a little thick around the base. So they're often found near bodies of water and reeds. So they're omnivorous. They eat insects. They'll eat berries, they'll eat seeds. We see them a lot at our feeders if you have a bird feeder up. So what I want you to do now is I want you to tell me, is this bird the same bird or is it different? Awesome, a lot of us are getting it. Is this the female? So first off, looking at this bird, do we see any similarities? I'll go back. Oop. There we go. So we can look at this one real quick, and then do we see any similarities? Yeah, the field guide is extremely helpful when it comes to comparing bird species. I really like to look at the beak of these two birds. The beak is really similar. And the colors are totally different. So a lot of you got that right. This is actually the female red-winged blackbird. A lot of birds, the males and females look different. It's called sexually dimorphic. So why do we think the males and the females look differently? The male was really bright and colorful. This female is a lot more brown and streaked. Yeah, the males attract females. So they need to be bright and colorful in order to attract the female. But why does the female have to be more brown colored? Yeah, camouflage. What are females trying to protect? Yeah, they're trying to hide the eggs. Great job. The females need to stay on the nest most of the time and hide those eggs. Cool. I know a lot of time in the field when I've led bird walks, and I really like to see the female red-winged blackbirds, especially if there's no male around. It can be extremely difficult identifying females and males. And I think Neil said it earlier, the field guide, if we have the book, it does a great job at comparing the females and the males. And every field guide will compare those. So that's a really important thing to look at. All right, here's our next bird. This is in a different family, and these can be a lot more difficult. If you've attended our Raptors 101 or Raptors 201 webinar, that might help. But again, even just guessing and getting down to family, it's a great start. And sorry, the photo is a little blurry. But when we're birding, we always don't get the clearest of visions. This is a hawk. I like that we've gotten it narrowed down to the family. This is a type of hawk. So hawks can be seen a lot when they're soaring. They can also be seen when they're perched. This one's perched on a wire. And identifying birds in flight and also perched, they can look totally different. So it's really important to look at both. If you have not seen our Raptors 101 or Raptors 201 webinar, we go in a lot into the different types of raptors. All of our webinars are posted on our YouTube page, which I'll be sending a link out to you all after this webinar. So you can always check out our past webinars as well. So I see broad-winged hawk, maybe a Cooper's hawk, maybe a goshawk. Hawks can be extremely difficult to identify. One feature I want to point out with this bird is this belly band. So as we can see, it's a little bit darker on its belly. And this is one identifying mark that this bird will separate this hawk from a lot of other hawks. And some of us are getting it. I wanted to kind of trick you all by doing this one not in flight. This is actually a red-tailed hawk. So we don't see the red tail, and we don't always see the red tail when it comes to red-tailed hawks. So it's important to look at those other features. So when they're perched, you'll see this belly band, this dark band on its belly, and that'll help you identify it as a red tail. Red tails are also the most common hawk that we have in North America. Whenever I'm out birding or even driving, when I see these a lot, I always like to say it's most likely a red-tailed hawk until proven otherwise, because mostly what we see are the red-tailed hawk. I actually do not have a picture of the red-tailed hawk in flight, but if you watch one of our Raptor 101 or Raptor 201 webinars, they go in a lot about the flight. I just wanted to show you it perching because it is really, I see these every day perched on a telephone pole or a wire. But with the adult red tails, they will have the dark red tail. But if they're juvenile, they don't. Yeah, so the belly band, if we look closely at this, we see this darker band that goes across its belly or its breast. It's a great field mark and something that stands out to me when we're looking at this. So the red-tailed hawk, it's a beautiful hawk. I love watching them. I was actually watching a pair yesterday at the dog park. They were hunting. It was really windy, and they were just soaring and then hunting down to the ground and catching snakes, which was pretty cool. All right. And I'm moving through a bunch of different families of birds to kind of give you the whole gamut of what we can see. So this bird, as we can see, its habitat is near the shore or near the lake, but it's not floating in the lake. So that should help you narrow it down a little bit more. So going through these steps, the size of the bird. This bird is actually, it's a little bit bigger than I would say a Canada goose. It definitely has longer legs than a Canada goose. And there's two birds that actually look really similar that we can get mixed up sometimes, and we'll go into that in a little bit. Awesome. I see a lot of us are getting it. Yeah, this is the snowy egret. So like the egret and the herons, they are wading birds. They have very long legs, and they like to hang out in the shallow areas of lakes and ponds. What I want to do is actually have a picture comparing the snowy egret and the great egret. So when it comes to birding, there's a lot of birds that look very similar. And if you're lucky enough to compare them side by side, we can notice a lot. So what differences do we notice between the great egret and the snowy egret? The snowy is on the left and the great egret is on the right. What differences do you notice? Yeah, the size, the beak color, the feet color. Yeah, when we see them side by side, they look actually very different, especially to me. But when one's flying by or you don't see them side by side, they can actually be a little tricky, especially if you're in a range where they mix, where you can see great and snowy egrets. Uh, the most, the one thing I look for, the first thing I look for when I see an egret is their feet. So I noticed that some of you said that they have these orange or yellow feet on the snowy egret. I like to call them it's their rain boots. So the snowy egret has some fancy yellow rain boots on, and the great egret does not. They just have full black feet and black legs. Their plumage is pretty similar. You can see they have some longer feathers that hang down. They're all white. So sometimes the feather patterns or feather colors we still can't identify. So we need to look at the beak colors or the beak shapes or even their legs. So good job, everyone. You're doing an amazing job. Learning celebrations are a great way to learn. Oh, here we go. All right, and this is one of our last birds. This one might be a little bit harder. So again, trying to get it down to family is always a good first step. If it looks like any birds you might have been seeing, we have a lot of these birds in Colorado in the summertime. They're really beautiful to see. I saw some yesterday. And if you do know what this bird is, it's really important too to know what family it is in. But as we can see, it has this really bright yellow kind of underneath on its belly. These white feathers on the tail are another great field mark to look for because there are similar species that look a lot like this bird. And this bird can be seen mostly in the middle, the west and the central of North America. They don't really venture too far out east. And once you get into yellow birds, there are a lot of birds that have yellow, so that makes it a little bit harder too. I see these a lot, just like this picture on a barbed wire fence, looking around to catch food. If you don't know what type of bird it is, based on the beak, what type of food do we think this bird might eat? And that'll help you narrow it down as well. So what kind of food do we think that this, it's kind of got a smaller beak. It's pretty sharp on the end. Yeah, this is an insect eater. And to help you guys narrow it down, this is actually in the flycatcher family. So this one might not come up on Merlin. It might be based on the pack that you've downloaded on Merlin. It might not have this area. That can only be the one thing that I suggest. You might have a different area. So a lot of you are getting it. This is the Western kingbird. So I've been saying a lot, trying to get it down to a family. So if you are using a field guide, the family is, so if we think about the order, family comes before species. So this would be in a flycatcher family, or there's sparrows, tanagers, there's, hawks, falcons. You can find this one all throughout Colorado in the summertime, not up high in the alpine, but if you're out in the prairie, you would see these a lot. Okay, and now we're gonna do a bonus round. Here's our quick bonus round. If you know any of these, feel free to type in the number of what you see. Some of these might be a little tricky. And I said we didn't have a picture of one flying, of one of the birds earlier, but there's a hint here. We do have one of the birds we identified earlier. Yeah, and I see that Kelsey suggests All About Birds. All About Birds is a great resource online, allaboutbirds.org, to learn a lot more about birds in general and look at how many we see. I'll also appreciate you guys even just getting down to the families. It's definitely a great way to start. So a lot of us has got number two. Number two is that belted kingfisher. These are one of my favorite birds. I love watching them and hearing them coming down a canyon. All right. So you can keep on guessing, but I'm going to kind of move on. We're running low on time. So number one, that is actually a yellow warbler. So we see these warblers, for one, are really, really hard to see. They like to be in brushes and thickets, and they can be kind of hard to see, but they're always that really bright yellows, really beautiful. Number two is that belted kingfisher. Number three, that is the red-tailed hawk. We can see that it has that red tail. Also with the red-tailed hawk, the shoulders are kind of brownish black. That's a really important field mark to look for. And number four is the hooded merganser. So out here in Colorado, we get a lot of really amazing ducks, especially in the wintertime when they're migrating down here. And the hooded merganser is one of those beautiful male ducks that we can see. So good job, everyone. Thank you for participating in our fun learning celebration. Even looking at pictures of birds, you can learn a lot, because I can tell you right now, if you look at this belted kingfisher in the picture and you just so happen to be near a river and you see one, your memory will flash back, and I'm sure you'll remember what that bird is. All right, so we're wrapping up this webinar. I just wanted to talk briefly about these 7 simple actions to help birds. So as a conservation organization, we do our best to educate people on how to keep birds, conserve them, because they are decreasing. We've lost 3 billion birds in North America since 1970, which is a huge number. So just quickly, I'm not going to go too into depth, but again, we did a webinar a couple weeks back that we dive into these a little bit more. So these 7 simple actions, we have drink shade grown coffee. That just provides birds more habitat. To use less plastic. Plastic is not good to be ingested by anyone or any animal. It's to do citizen science. If you watch our Birding 201 webinar on our YouTube, we go a little bit more into citizen science and eBird and ways that you all can help share your knowledge with the science community. Another one is to make windows safer. A lot of birds die by striking windows, which I won't go too into depth. Again, we'll give you a resource for you guys to look more into these. But a really important one is to keep your cats indoors. Cats are actually the #1 killer of birds, and we lose more birds with cats eating the birds than any other of these 7 simple actions. So keeping cats indoors, using native plants in your gardens, and then avoiding pesticides. So these are just 7 simple things that you all can do. I wish I had time to go into it more, but I'll share a link to one of our webinars where we really go into depth of each of these steps. So to wrap things up, birding is a skill. If you want to get better at it, you need to practice. The more that you go birding, the more that you read your field guide, the better that you're going to get. Birding is a lifelong hobby, like I said earlier. The more you do it, the better you're going to get. So use that Merlin Bird ID app, use the field guides. You can go on to Cornell Lab of Ornithology. They have great courses you can take. Thayer's birding software is a software that you can download. I'll include a link with the thank you email to that. They're actually giving away their software for free right now, and you can do a lot of fun birding quizzes. And then join birding groups. Go birding with your family, or go birding with people that are already birders. I learned a lot from my birding mentors back in college, and that's why I am in the career that I am in now, teaching people about birds. So lastly, keep in touch with us. As many of you might know, Bird Conservancy, our education programs, which are brought to you by Kelsey and myself, along with some other really dedicated members of our team. We work every day to connect people of all ages with nature and birds. With the coronavirus, we've actually suffered a huge loss in our program revenue. This would be a busy summer camp season for us, which we're not doing. If you're in a position to help keep these education programs like this one going, especially during these uncertain times, please support us at birdconservancy.org/donate. We are a nonprofit. We are so thankful for anyone that can donate any money to us to keep me and Kelsey employed and to keep teaching you all about our passion and about birds. So thank you so much for participating in today's virtual program. Next week, we'll be joined by Stacy, and she's going to be doing a webinar all on owls. So it's going to be Owls 101. You can register the same way you registered for this webinar. We'll get that link up hopefully in the next couple of days, and I'll send it along with that email. If you've missed any of our webinars, check out our YouTube page. We have them all up there recorded. I will also include the PDF of this webinar in our thank you email. So thank you so much for joining us. I hope you all stay happy and healthy. And me and Kelsey will actually stick around for a couple minutes. If anyone has any questions, we can answer those. But if you need to take off, feel free. I hope you can go find some birds today or find some tomorrow. But if you have any questions, feel free to type those into the chat window, and we'll stick around for a little longer and answer those questions. So thank you, everyone. And
Tyler,
Kelsey, yeah, go ahead.
Yes, we did have a question about what kind of bird that was on the 7 Simple Steps slide.
Ooh, the 7 Simple Steps slide.
Yes.
That is a beautiful bird. This bird is actually in the same family as an American robin. This is in the thrush family. This is actually called a wood thrush. If you're out on the East Coast, you might hear these or see these more. If you're out here in Colorado, we get the hermit thrush and the Swainson's thrush, which look a lot like this bird. So that's a wood thrush. I think thrushes have some of the most beautiful songs. If you ever go hiking out in the Rockies and just listen in the woods, you'll hear their really flute-like song. So thank you for that question.
We also have a question about if we ever do webinars on backyard birds, identification, feeding, bird feeders, bird bath, basically keeping a birdie backyard.
Yeah, that's awesome. We did a webinar a couple weeks back, which we have on our YouTube page. That's actually called Birdie Backyards. So in that Birdie Backyard webinar, we go into depth about feeding and identifying and bird baths. We also dive a lot into those 7 simple steps to make sure that your backyard is as bird friendly as possible. So if you want to go onto our YouTube channel, you can just go onto youtube.com and type in Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. And Kayla, if you want to watch that Birdie Backyards webinar, it'll dive into all of those questions that you have. Oh, and do we do anything with Scout merit badges? We try to help out Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts as much as possible. If you have a question about how we can help you with any of those badges, feel free to email us at that education@birdconservancy.org. And we'd love to help anyone out getting one of those badges. Ooh, I've heard a loud bird at night. Many birds that are vocal at night. So Sarah, to answer your question, there are a lot of birds that can still be active at night. Owls are nocturnal. There's porwills that are nocturnal as well. The next time you hear that bird, try to identify it. If it's a loud screech and you're in the area, it could be a barn owl. They sound pretty frightening. Yeah, great question. I challenge you to try to identify that. And if you have the Merlin Bird ID app, Sarah, you can look at those nocturnal bird sounds and try to identify them. All right, so it looks like we're kind of running low on questions. Okay, so it didn't sound like an owl. Huh, interesting. So the only owl that actually sounds like a hooting owl, what we like to describe an owl as, is the great horned owl. A lot of owls actually make like crazy screeching noises. So good luck. Like Kelsey said, you can email it to us. Well, we can try to figure it out if you want to try to describe that sound. But it is 12 o'clock. I want to make sure that you all can go out and enjoy the rest of your day. I challenge you to find some birds today and put these skills to use. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a lot of fun doing these webinars and teaching you all virtually. This probably wouldn't happen if we didn't start these webinars. So thank you so much. Look forward to an email from me coming the next couple of days with a lot of resources and a link to the recording of this webinar. So we're going to end the meeting. Thank you so much, and I hope you all have a great day.